choose to go into that profession where they can willingly sacrifice their life and serve the nation's interest before their own interest. So I'm not saying everybody has to become that, but generally, if there is a dilemma and if it comes to that, can we do this? Only then the nation will progress. And that is where national security is something that needs to, the paradigm change or the new approach to national security that has to come in. I must say that I have watched the space, as we call it, the space of national security for a long time now, almost 3 decades. And why I am hopeful that the current government under Prime Minister Modi is focused single-mindedly on securing India. That's why I called this book, the title is Securing India. And why do I call it the Modi way? Because he's changed several things in terms of approach, in terms of systems, in terms of getting everything for India. And I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. In today's, in this government, what drives national security? It drives self-interest or national interest. It does not look at if my friend in Palestine is going to be hurt or if my friend in Israel is going to be hurt. So it is driven by self-interest or national interest. It is pragmatic and it is bold. And I'll give you just 2 or 3 examples. All of you must have heard or read the debate about how India is a great friend of Israel, and we have openly, Prime Minister Modi became the first Prime Minister to go to Israel despite having diplomatic ties with them from 1992. So 25 years after the diplomatic ties began, no Prime Minister from India dared to go to Israel because everyone thought that if we go there, the Arab world and consequently the Muslim population in India will get hurt and they will not support us. So that was the hesitation. So the hesitation of history has gone. Having gone to Israel and supported Israel and taken things from Israel, everybody expected India to support Israel and US resolution in the UN for shifting the capital of Israel to Jerusalem. India didn't do it. Everyone was shocked. The fact is, India or the Indian decision makers looked at what is India's national interest. India's national interest is that we have a lot of investment in terms of manpower, in terms of economy, in terms of cultural ties with the Arab world. A collective trade with the Arab countries that India has, bilateral trade, or with all the Arab countries in the Gulf and West Asia as we call them, or they call it Middle East, is something like $122 billion a year. Our bilateral trade with Israel is just $5 billion. how much will that figure be? About 7 million people, Indian origin people, live in the Gulf and work in the Gulf. Many of them support the economies of the Gulf countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, name them, and they're the Bahrain, they're all there. Now, their remittances also make nearly 80% of the remittances that come from abroad. They sustain economies in, say, parts of Uttar Pradesh, parts of Kerala, parts of Karnataka. So a lot of money comes back from remittances from there. We are dependent on oil from the Gulf countries. 70% of our oil comes from the Gulf countries, although we have now shifted it a little bit to the US and to Russia in some cases. China, no. Venezuela, but Venezuela is collapsing, so we don't know as a country. So that is the interest that we have. So therefore India voted against Israel. Sure, Israel was unhappy, they were annoyed, but the very fact that their Prime Minister came here on a 7-day visit immediately following the vote on Palestine shows that every nation which is strong, which believes in itself, which is self-confident, will do what exactly is needed in national interest. It will not be dictated by these parochial and political considerations. That is the change that has come. Dealing with Pakistan, we have tried everything with Pakistan over the past 70 years. We've tried talks, we've said confidence building measures, we called ceasefire, we've had Shimla agreement, we've had Sharm el Sheikh agreement, everything that we have tried, nothing has worked. So this government says we are going to now not talk to Pakistan until it stops supporting terrorism. It does not make a lot of people happy, but that is the way the government has decided that we are going to deal with it. We will first control the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. If 2016 November or December you went to Srinagar especially or to the valley, you would have felt that it is now back to what used to be pre-1989, 1990 situation, where Indian control does not seem to be there in the valley. Within a year or so, it's all been brought back, that control, hard measures, a lot of elimination of terrorists and their groups and their leaders has taken place. You don't hear of stone building anymore in the valley, which was at such a height in 2016, early 2017. So the hard approach has been taken, and India has said that we are not going to talk to Pakistan until they stop sponsoring terrorism. So that's one approach they are trying. Mind you, Prime Minister Modi went all the way to Lahore to greet Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif that time, just as a olive branch or to sort of as a gesture which he thought that will bring in peace. But in Pakistan, it's not the civil government or the political authority that decides. It is the Pakistani army. It does not want, its whole existence of the Pakistani army depends on enmity with India, animosity with India, promoting jihad in India. So they are not going to let it go, because that is how they have fattened themselves over the years. The budget that they get, despite the lagging economy, despite what is happening to internally, what is happening to Pakistan in terms of sectarian violence, insurgency, militancy, terrorism, everything. The Pakistani army sits pretty because its entire existence depends on promoting enmity with India. So India said, okay, we are not going to talk for a while. China. We've had number of rounds of discussion on the boundary issue. Our trade has grown with China over the years. We have improved our, I would say, cultural and people-to-people ties with China over the past 20 years or so, or more in fact. And yet China continues to oppose India in very many forums. NSG, it does not support India's quest for getting Masood Azhar designated as an international terrorist. So India has decided that, and we of course have the occasional skirmishes on the border. So what happened in Dolam, which everyone calls it Doklam, actually the correct name is Dolam. India took a firm stand and said, on the border we will be resolute, in diplomacy we will be reasonable. So ultimately it is resolved with diplomacy, not by force. No fire was exchanged, there was no fisticuffs, although you saw some videos, I'm sure, in Ladakh where people are jostling and throwing stones at each other, all that you would have seen. So the new approach is be reasonable in diplomacy, in discussions, but be resolute on the ground. Stand firm. Don't give an inch to your adversary. So that is something that has happened as far as China is concerned. So what India is trying to do, to just sum up a little bit, in national security, the current government's approach is that we will take a comprehensive view. We will try and make the economy stronger than before. We will have good ties with all our friends and not so friendly nations, but not at the cost of national interest. So we will do what is in national interest. So we will deal with each of them bilaterally. So India's approach to, say, Gulf countries, where there is a lot of internal struggle between, say, Iran and Saudi Arabia, Qatar and UAE, all that, we still have good relations with all of them individually, bilaterally. So India's current approach can be summed up in two words: foreign policy and security policy based on national interest and not influenced by extraneous factors or extraneous politics. If that is the case, then we are moving towards a a situation where India will sometimes bilaterally be friendly with China. On climate change, they are working together. But bilaterally, there is a problem on the boundary, there is a problem on energy. Similarly, India is getting uranium from Australia, but it does not allow Australia to join the Malabar exercise, which happens with the naval exercise with US and Japan, trilateral exercise, because Australians had abandoned us in 2007 under Chinese pressure. So another example of pragmatic national interest. Uh, Similarly, looking at Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, China is coming all around us. Nepal. The influence, the Chinese influence is increased. So what is India doing? India is going into what is, and you must have heard this term, string of pearls around India's neck. But India is also doing reverse string of pearls. So the 10 ASEAN nation leaders who are here over the weekend, it's basically to wean them away from China. If they have built a base in Djibouti on the Horn of Africa, on the east coast of Africa, India is building 2 naval bases in Seychelles and Mauritius. One island called Assumption in Seychelles and Agalega, North Agalega Island in Mauritius, where we are building our facilities. So we are going to have bases there. If they are building Hambantota or if they are building Gwadar, we have gone to Chabahar. So, normally what happens is we miss this. We always try to overanalyze what our adversary is doing without taking into consideration that we are also doing a lot of things. Chabahar is a game changer in a way. Now you got access to Afghanistan and from Afghanistan into Central Asia. Although a circuitous route, but you still have that. Chabahar is not very far from Bombay or west coast of India. And Gwadar this is a counterweight for Gwadar. Getting all the ASEAN nations together and getting them here, improving our ties with them, both diplomatic and military ties with them, lends counterweight to China. So there is a lot of jostling going on between India and China in Asia, and Indo-Pacific is now become the new playground for what used to be a playground for the new version of the Great Game. If you have read history, the Great Game of the 19th century was between Russia and Great Britain, and it was played in Central Asia and in Afghanistan. There was always the tussle between the Russian state, the Tsars, and then later the communist of Russia, and Great Britain. So India or Afghanistan, Nepal, all the Himalayas were considered the buffer between, or Tibet was a buffer between India and China, or Great Britain ruled India and China that time. That great game has now shifted itself to Indian Ocean, where China is trying to make greater forays into Indian Ocean. India is going eastward, China is coming westward. So there's bound to be a collision somewhere or the other. But we have an advantage because India sits geographically astride what is called the sea lanes of communication, the 6-degree and 8-degree channel that passes just below India, south of India, very near Andaman Nicobar Islands. So India has the advantage of being a permanent or a stable aircraft carrier. We are jutting into Indian Ocean. We can project our power right up to Mauritius and this side right up to beyond Indonesia if you want to. So China has a big dilemma of what is called the Malacca Straits dilemma, where they have the choke points where all their energy supplies go via the Indian Ocean into Andaman Sea and then to South China Sea and then going into China. Therefore they are building Gwadar to take alternate energy route via CPEC. But CPEC is not fully secure. Balochistan is a Achilles heels as far as China is concerned. So there is a great game, great churning going on. And therefore national security has to be seen from different angles. It is not just about, as I said, military hardware. It's not about the number of soldiers, not about the number of airmen or the air warriors or the number of ships that you have. It's also about national will. It's also about how your leaders perform under pressure. So when Dolam happened, it would have been easy for India to say, okay, it's got nothing to do with us, it's between Bhutan and China, although they are right next door to us. But we looked at our national interest, and then it was decided that India will go and intervene. See, China expected protests from India, from Bhutan, a diplomatic protest from Bhutan, when they came and started building that road. What they didn't expect was India's military intervention. That was something that was unexpected for them. They did not know how to react. It's like the college bully who will keep shouting, who will keep threatening you all the time. But the moment you stand up, that fellow will either back down or will say, okay, let's compromise. You know? So China is a great bully. It hasn't fought a war in 40 years almost. 1979 was the last war they fought with Vietnam. Indian forces keep fighting everywhere. In Maoist areas, in the police fire or the CRPF fights there, or in Jammu Kashmir and Northeast, our people contribute the largest number of troops in the UN missions. Our Navy is a much more experienced Navy. The Air Force has proved itself a number of times. So it's not as if India is a weak nation and China is a very strong nation. But nobody wants war. Nobody wants conflict. So therefore, national security is determined by, as I mentioned, national will, national comprehensive power, national economy, and the ability to take the right decisions under pressure. And that's where it stands today. It's not fully secure, the country, but there are signs that we are becoming a strong nation, despite, and all the reaction that is coming in from the backlash that is coming in from Pakistan or from China or from or other elements that are inimical to us, it is because they suddenly find that there is a kind of consolidation of the approach towards national security under this government, and therefore they do not want this government to succeed in as many fields as possible. Therefore, the number of ceasefire violations in Jammu and Kashmir have gone up because there is much more proactive approach, proactive operations that are happening. The number of Maoists killed and surrendered in the past 3 years, if you see, compare it with the previous 3 years, you will get the success ratio. All that is happening. So that is where we stand today. As I said, it's only a half-done job, but well begun is half done. So let us hope that things will improve as we go along, and all of you will have to contribute to the comprehensive national power by doing your job well, sort of putting nation first, as I mentioned. Whenever the clash occurs between self-interest and national interest, if majority of you put national interest first, probably we are better off as a society and as a nation. So on that note, I'm going to stop and then maybe answer your or take on your criticism, suggestions, questions, whatever you have. Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Sir, what we are forgetting in national security is police reform. Because I think the fundamental bricks of national security is police reform,
Sure.
which are missing from the 1860.
That's right.
What is your opinion?
I agree.
Because police reform is a state subject.
That's right.
And the state center cannot intervene in that particular matter.
I agree on that, and therefore I say that I think I remarked that in some cases or some subjects, all differences have to be put aside. Political, personal, and this is where I think all political parties, the society, police, everybody needs to come together to do. They are urgently required. You are aware of Mr. Prakash Singh, who was a DG of police in Uttar Pradesh, also DG of BSF. He's won the case in Supreme Court. Supreme Court has ordered it, but somehow most political parties are reluctant to do the police reforms for their own benefit, because a compromised police or a politicized police serves the purpose of political parties, and therefore, so what is the solution, you ask me? The solution is, or my opinion is, unless people start demanding an agile, a fair, and a modern police force, in various ways, various forums, write-ups, agitations, wherever you interact, wherever if cases are filed and say, why haven't you implemented? All that needs to be done. It is ultimately in a democracy, people's voice and people's support or people's pressure actually prevails. Unfortunately, we are not giving enough attention as a society to what is required. You rightly said that police reforms have been neglected, and because police or the constable is the first responder to any crisis, right? And as lawyers, I think, or budding lawyers, or to be lawyers, all of you need to do something on this front, which the media has done a number of times, has written articles, that. But see what you can do as lawyers. But I think people's pressure, common citizens' pressure, will only work. Otherwise, on its own, it's going to be a very slow process. People will do it according to what serves their interest. And the people in power, everywhere in the states, they will do, if it serves their interest today, they will do it, or they will initiate something. If it doesn't serve their interest tomorrow, they will not do it. So I think people's pressure is extremely important. Right? Yes.
Sir, I have a question. The terrorism in Punjab was at its peak, and it was the worst sort of terrorism compared to what we see in J&K today. The Walsall was at hem of affairs at that point of time. We handled Punjab terrorism in the best way possible, and now we see this very, very, very less of terrorism aspect in Punjab. The same situation in J&K, and it has been decades and decades we have not been able to tackle that. We are not talking about political reasons out here, but I feel that we handled Punjab because Punjab, in terms of vote bank politics, Punjab had a very limited share, and it was not affecting vote bank politics in any part of country. But Muslims as such, they are swingers in almost a lot number of parliamentary seats. Is that one of the reasons why we not been able to handle J&K terrorism thing while we were able to handle Punjab terrorism at that point of time?
Well, yes and no, both. I'll give you a little long answer than normally I would do. Punjab was a unique case in the sense that it was an externally sponsored movement or an insurgency. Very small group of people wanted Khalistan. Large number of people in Punjab were actually very industrious and very prosperous, kind of agriculturalists or business people, something of that kind. And therefore, they, given a chance, the moment they got a chance to sort of rise up against insurgency or against that terrorism that was unleashed in Punjab, with the help of the police and then also the center, they could get over the insurgency in Punjab. Kashmir situation, Jammu Kashmir situation is slightly different. In the sense, it is that classical insurgency where there is a volatile and a very toxic mix of internal dissension, external proxy war. Actually, what is happening in J&K is not just terrorism, it is war by another name. And we had actually, this is the unfortunate part, that we had got control over insurgency or in Kashmir, or terrorism in Kashmir by the beginning of this decade, by about 2002-2003, post that incident in New York or in the US. Terrorism in Kashmir, thanks to the efforts of all the security forces and some political initiatives, had come down to a level where it needed a political solution. But there I agree with you, so that's why I said yes and no. There, political interest interfered in finding a final solution. And so we are back to what used to be a level of violence in the late 80s, early 90s. But again, as I said, this last 1 year has seen the turnaround. We are coming to a situation where, again, terrorism is under control. The number of deaths will of course go up because we are killing more and more terrorists. Your own security forces are dying, all that. But all other indicators, where your schools get shut down, there's disturbance, your business doesn't work or does not function, all those indicators are showing signs of improvement. And therefore I think this year, 2018, will be very crucial, because if we can get some of the elements of, I won't say a permanent solution, but some of the elements that satisfy the grievances that people have, we are on the road to recovery in J&K. It's a long haul process, because it has also got a factor which is not in our hand, which is the proxy support or proxy war that is waged by Pakistan. Therefore, it's a long haul. But let's not lose hope. I am aware that many attempts are being made, many efforts parallelly are being made to develop the state, to improve its economy, to give people more and more opportunities outside Jammu and Kashmir, and also, of course, keep a tight lid on the security situation. So I think there has been a lot of setbacks certainly over the past 3-4 years, because you must understand that this government today, which is in power, is hated by Pakistan more than any other government in this country for for its obvious reasons. So therefore, backlash was expected. We've sort of overcome that hump or that obstacle now. Now it can only improve from here, but it will still take, I would think, at least 18 to 20 months from now. That's what it is. Yes. I'll go this side somewhere. Somebody had a yes.
So as you mentioned about the India's unique situation because of geography and India under Modi regime, don't you think that till now, why instead of we are building faith, because this is a new type of diplomacy that has been developed by Israel, that when account it came and Netanyahu said that we are not concerned about the India's good, that it is only that thing that will trigger the track 2 or track 2 trade diplomacy with people to people. But he is moving towards a new diplomatic area where each nation state is acting in their own national interest. Now in counterpart, India has what it has done, Act East policy right now and all these things. Don't you think that we are losing our own base, because in South Asia we have not been capable enough to undertake, technically we are losing Nepal.
Just
Now, yeah. And then we have same with the condition with Bhutan also, that till now we are having the one road in entire Northeast, and Bhutan and Myanmar and Thailand also, they swapped their deal that we are not MMB, which we
BBI.
Yes, BBI. So don't you think that this type of diplomacy will work in long run?
Yes, I will answer that.
what's your opinion?
Yeah. See, what happens is, it's a very complex. Diplomacy is not about overnight solutions. Diplomacy is all about looking at the long term, constantly working working at finding solutions, or doing what is called sort of keeping the effort going all the time. It's also about, and diplomacy cannot get every solution. Every nation also looks at its, like India is looking at its self-interest. All nations around us, which are small nations, which are developing economies, also look at their self-interest. And many of them, like Sri Lanka and Nepal, have perfected this art of pitting India against China, or pitting India against Pakistan, in many of these cases. So therefore, I would see it like this, that you talked about whether India is weakening its base, losing control in Nepal or Bhutan or like that. It doesn't happen like that. I'll tell you an example. I mean, Sri Lanka, during the war, the Ilam War 4, was dependent on weapons and ammunition from China and Pakistan. But it still needed India's moral and intelligence support to overcome the challenge posed by the LTTE. The people-to-people contact between these countries, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Bhutan, for instance, with Indian people and Indian economy, is much deeper than China can ever get. No matter how much money China pours into Sri Lanka or Nepal. A Sri Lankan friend very nicely put it. He said, we might go for Chinese yuan or American dollars, but we spend those American dollars and American Chinese yuan in either Chennai or Hyderabad or in Bodh Gaya, because the cultural ties are so deep. From birth to marriage, the Sri Lankan people are looking at India as their second home. So therefore, I am not very concerned about these episodic ups and downs. Today, the Sri Lankans have realized, for instance, that what they did with by taking the Chinese money or Chinese loans They've got into a debt trap. Today, $8 billion they have to pay back to the Chinese.